I'm Clive Bull. This is LBC and the Property Hour. Now, thanks to Direct Line Landlord Insurance, today we're discussing malicious damage to rental properties. Kate Faulkner is still with us from propertychecklists.co.uk. So, Kate, what do we mean when we talk about malicious damage, first of all?
Well, it's about as bad as it sounds, actually. What it really means is that a tenant or somebody that visits the property to go and say hi to the tenant does cause damage, and they do it deliberately. So, under normal sort of landlord insurance, if there's some accidental damage, you would be covered. But if somebody decides to punch a wall, or if they put graffiti, that kind of thing, then that's what we class as malicious damage. The issue for a lot of landlords is usually that's not necessarily included in the standard cover, so you need to make sure it's kind of one of the things that you consider.
Is it a common problem then in the property market?
It is more common than you'd like to think, to be honest. So the problem with it is that a lot of the insurance claims that you do, they're not too expensive, but when it comes to malicious damage, it can go from thousands to tens of thousands. So somebody might just steal a bit of copper piping and you've got to make a claim for that potentially. But the biggest fear that most people have and should worry about is actually somebody building a cannabis factory in your home, and if you just have standard cover and you don't have malicious damage, you could be into £20,000, £30,000, £40,000 to get it fixed.
What types of malicious damage do landlords tend to experience then? I mean, you mentioned the cannabis factory. That's a pretty extreme example.
It is, but we are talking, thousands and thousands of these being set up every that we've seen over the years. So basically, some of the criminals out there target landlords, particularly if they're not working with a good agent, and they just pay them off for 6 months and say, "Don't visit me," wire up the house and start growing plants. But the more typical things are things like stealing the copper the piping, a boiler might go missing, holes in the wall, and we're not talking when you put your pictures up, but as I say, people sort of punching them, that kind of things. I've heard of somebody just put a fire in the lounge when there wasn't supposed to be a fire in the lounge. They just decided to have an open fire on the rug. Breaking windows, damaging kitchen units, mucking about in the bathroom and really causing problems, split loos, all of that kind of thing. So, and then they might decide to leave and just take all the fixtures and fittings with them, which is classed as real damage.
And is one type of property more prone to this than another?
Well, I kind of think about the law of averages in this case. So the more people that you have in a property, so in other words, if you're renting to one person in, a one-bed flat and you do it unfurnished, there's a limited amount of damage that they can potentially do. Whereas if you're doing a house in multiple occupation, like a student living, and you've got 6 or 7 people in there, you've let it potentially fully furnished with lots of beds or whatever it might be, the more stuff you put in, basically, and the more people you put in, the more likely it is to happen. So that's the payoff that you have. It's more risky.
So what is your advice then for landlords to minimise this risk?
Do you know, it's a slightly bizarre way of doing it, but two things. The more you help that tenant feel that this is their home, so allow them maybe to paint. Obviously, you don't want bright pink, but allow them to decorate or allow them to make them feel that it's their home. And the more beautiful a condition you let your property in, it's far less likely to happen. So if you hand over a property in a great condition, they're far more likely to look after it. Over and above that, what you want to make sure is that you buy in an area, I have to say that, where you have a low crime rate, because otherwise doors can get kicked in, windows broken, that kind of thing. Very thorough referencing, making sure that if that tenant has been a tenant before, they've looked after the property. Always secure a deposit. We've heard earlier with the questions that we've had, but please, it is a legal requirement to make sure that is protected in one of the government licence schemes. And just making sure that you've got the latest rental agreement, because if you haven't, or you haven't provided the right information to the tenant when they went in, they could do damage to your property, and then you might not be able to evict them, but that process might cause them to do even more damage.
OK, well, thanks to Direct Line Landlord Insurance. And for more information and for the chance to win a tech bundle, go to lbc.co.uk.